there is a silence more real than words, a stillness older than sound, and from this abyssal hush, the truth emerges. Like a ghost drifting through the ruins of thought, the world is not a stage for triumph, nor a canvas for joy, but a blind engine of striving, grinding flesh into memory. We do not live, we are compelled, pulled by the rootless will, that ancient tyrant embedded in every cell, every breath, every restless gaze cast toward things we believe will satisfy. This will, ceaseless and blind, has no goal, no culmination, no peace. It only wants, and in wanting, it devours us. The newborn cries not from joy, but because it has been thrust into a world of hunger. That first breath is not a celebration of life, but a protest against becoming. From this moment, we are yoked to a cart of desire, drawn endlessly forward through a desert of lack. All fulfillment is illusion. The object, once desired, loses its power as soon as it is grasped. Like water pouring through the hands of a dying man, satisfaction is never sustained. It evaporates into a new longing, a new absence, a new torment disguised as purpose. Look upon civilization not as progress, but as a monument to collective delusion. The palaces, the markets, the temples, all are born of need masquerading as creation. Even love, that most worshipped of sentiments, is often but a cunning mask worn by the will to reproduce itself. In lovers' eyes burns not spiritual connection, but the ancient fire of procreation, the command of nature to perpetuate its own cycle of suffering. The soul mistakes this fire for salvation. Yet when the flame subsides, when the child is born or the passion fades, what remains is not transcendence, but the dull ache of repetition. Everything in this world is borrowed. Joy is a rented garment, soon torn away. Health is a temporary reprieve from decay. Friendship, too, is conditional. It endures only so long as it feeds some fragment of the self's appetite. Strip away utility, and you see the hollowness of our ties. The ego does not love. It clings, it demands, it possesses, and in its possession, it kills the very thing it pretends to cherish. Such is the hunger of the will. It cannot coexist with stillness. It must disturb, it must consume, and so it goes, chasing phantoms until the grave. Modernity, that great seduction, whispers that suffering can be transcended by speed, by pleasure, by the ever-flickering screen. The machines grow louder, but the heart grows emptier. Beneath the synthetic lights, beneath the noise of cities and the false promises of progress, lies the same ancient ache, the pain of being. No invention has cured longing. No doctrine has annulled the hunger for more. Even in the most glittering moments of success, there is a tremor, a sense that the thing achieved is not the thing we sought. This tremor is truth. It is the soul remembering what the world wants it to forget, that nothing here can deliver us. Some try to silence this tremor with distraction. They build lives of performance, constantly watched, endlessly curated as if being seen could replace being real. Others turn to substances, hoping the body can be tricked into forgetting its own futility. But the body, like the soul, remembers. It remembers in the quiet hours, in the still moments when the mask slips and the inner voice, that cold, ancient whisper returns. All this, it says, is a dream of need. And the dreamer cannot wake, for he is the dream itself. The wise do not seek escape through pleasure, for they know that pleasure is merely the shadow of pain. They do not hunger for praise, for they see that all praise is fleeting and given by those equally lost. Nor do they chase love, for they understand that to love is to bind another to one's own suffering. Instead, they turn inward, not in selfishness, but in resignation, a holy kind of retreat, like a monk walking backward into the void, not to die, but to cease becoming. To understand suffering is not to fix it, but to cease resisting it. The world will not change because we understand it. It will continue, as it always has a wheel of becoming, grinding joy into dust. But in understanding, a strange freedom arises. Not a freedom of choice, for the will chooses us, not we it. But a freedom of vision, the freedom to see clearly, to no longer lie to oneself. This clarity is not comforting. It does not soothe, but it dignifies. It removes the mask from existence and reveals the pale, bare face beneath. Even beauty, that last refuge of the romantic soul, is not immune to this truth. The sunset is not a promise, it is a fleeting accident of light. The mountains do not care for your wonder. The stars are not guides, but burning corpses of long dead suns. What we call beautiful is what temporarily quiets the will, what arrests the striving, and gives us a glimpse, just a glimpse of peace. But even this is ephemeral, and to cling to beauty is to misunderstand it. It is not a possession, it is a momentary silence, and all silence ends. What, then, remains when all illusions are stripped away? When the gods are revealed as human projections, when pleasure reveals its fangs, when the self is exposed as a house built on sand. What remains is not despair. Despair is still a form of wanting. What remains is sobriety, a metaphysical sobriety, colder than ice and clearer than glass. The kind of stillness one finds in the eyes of the dying, or in the ruins of an abandoned temple. A stillness that says, all this was never yours, and it was never meant to save you. This is not nihilism. To call it so is to miss the point. The nihilist still rages. He still wants meaning, and is angry it cannot be found. But the clear-eyed soul has no such demand. He sees that meaning itself is a construct, a balm for the fearful. The universe is not indifferent, it is unaware. It has no heart, no plan, no mercy. It simply is. And within it, we flicker brief, painful, radiant with longing. We scream into the dark, and the dark does not answer. But this, too, is freedom. To no longer beg the void for light. To sit quietly in the absence and say, this is what is. And from this acceptance, strange as it seems, a kind of peace arises, not the peace of fulfillment, but the peace of ceasing to chase. Like a man who has wandered the desert for years, only to realize the oasis was a mirage, and instead of weeping, he lays down in the sand and stops. Not because he is defeated, but because he has seen through the game, and in this seeing there is release. To suffer is to exist not as punishment, but as the fabric of becoming. Every moment of consciousness is touched by pain, subtle or sharp, not as an intruder, but as the essence of the thing itself. The beating heart does not ask permission to ache, it simply does. The lungs do not consult us before breathing in the dust of impermanence. In this quiet violence, we find no enemy, only the silent machinery of nature, indifferent and infinite, grinding all things into time. Desire, the root of the will, is not a choice. It is a reflex, involuntary and unyielding, a parasite embedded in the soul before thought begins. Even the wish to be free of desire is itself a desire, and so the serpent swallows its own tail, not in wisdom, but in futility. The more we crave peace, the more elusive it becomes, for craving is disturbance, and disturbance is the essence of life. Only when the will is silenced, not fulfilled, does peace appear, not as a reward, but as the absence of demand. Pleasure is not the presence of something good. It is merely the temporary suspension of pain. Like a cold cloth upon a fevered brow, it soothes only for a moment before the fever returns. And the more pleasure is pursued, the more the pain of its absence grows. The feast leads to hunger, the embrace to loneliness, the song to silence. Every high is a prelude to a low, and the soul, dragged between these poles, calls this motion living. But it is not living, it is enduring. The body, that temple of flesh and illusion, is not a friend but a leash. It hungers without rest, decays without pity, binds the will to the tyranny of time. Even beauty, that fragile blossom, is only the disguise of decay, youth waiting to dissolve into its opposite. The mirror does not lie, it merely records the erosion. And yet we return to it, as if affirmation could halt entropy. We worship the transient, hoping our gaze might preserve what nature has sworn to erase. We wear names, roles, histories like borrowed robes, stitched together by memory and ego. But beneath these garments there is no enduring self, only the current of the will, impersonating identity. The I we defend is an echo, a fiction the brain tells itself to survive. When the mask falls, what remains is not a soul in glory, but a quiet void, not absence, but the truth unclothed. To see this is not madness, it is clarity. The madness lies in pretending otherwise. Time is the silent executioner, not with rage, but with infinite patience. It does not wound, it wears down. Moments are not lived, but lost, falling away like leaves in winter wind. We chase them, try to hold them, name them as memories, but memory is a graveyard, and nostalgia is the scent of decay. The past cannot be returned to, the future cannot be trusted. Only the present exists, and even it vanishes in the act of noticing it. What is left, then, but the ache of impermanence? Even knowledge, that vaunted torch of human pride, does not save us. It only deepens the shadow. The more one sees, the more one suffers. The veil lifts, and behind it stands not a god, but a mechanism. Not providence, but accident. The soul that dares to see must bear the burden of what is seen. There is no consolation in truth, only the strange comfort of no longer needing to lie. Wisdom does not cure pain, it simply makes it holy. Love, too, which the poets exalt, is not immune to the verdict of the will. It appears as salvation, but functions as a trap, binding one will to another in mutual captivity. What we call devotion is often dependency. What we call passion is the will striving for self-continuation through another. And when the other departs, or fails, or dies, what remains is not enlightenment, but grief, the shadow of the same will unfulfilled. Love does not lift us out of suffering, it entwines us deeper in it. To detach is not to flee, it is to stand still in the storm and stop reaching for shelter. Detachment is not numbness, it is awareness, freed from demand. One still sees the beauty, but does not clutch it. One still feels the ache, but does not flee it. One still hears the cries of the world, but no longer believes them to be a call for action. Detachment is not death, it is the renunciation of illusion. The curtain falls, and the stage is revealed as wood and dust. Silence is the purest response to existence. Not silence as emptiness, but as presence beyond sound, the silence of the deep woods, the silence of a dying fire, the silence of an unanswered prayer. In that silence, one finds no God, no meaning, no design, only being itself, cold and clear. And yet, strangely, this is enough, for in silence, the will has no footing. In silence, striving collapses, and what remains is not ecstasy, but peace, not in the world, but beyond it. The world as representation is a dream, painted in the colors of perception, woven by the loom of mind and senses. But the world as will the thing in itself is hunger without end. And to live is to be devoured by this hunger, to mistake its teeth for kisses, its commands for desires. The dream is beautiful, but the waking is cruel. Yet only in waking can one cease to be deceived. Art, in its truest form, does not entertain, it reveals. It suspends the will, if only briefly, and lets the viewer glimpse the stillness beneath the motion, not to escape life, but to see through it. The tragedy, the painting, the sonata, these are not diversions, but windows into the abyss made bearable by form. They show suffering not as aberration, but as essence. And in this showing, they dignify it. Death is not the enemy, for it is the only true silence. Life is noise, a fevered murmur of wants and wounds. Death ends the murmur. What terrifies us is not death, but the idea that our will ends with it, that our desires dissolve into nothing. But this is the mercy we dare not name, that the wheel stops turning, the flame ceases to burn, the will releases its grip. In this, there is no horror, only stillness. And so the wise do not pray for happiness, nor for answers. They pray, if at all, for clarity, the kind that strips the soul bare, that leaves nothing but what cannot be taken. They pray not to be spared suffering, but to see it without illusion. They do not seek to conquer the world, but to unbind themselves from it. For what can the world offer once one has seen through its masks? To continue to live is to continue to hope, and to hope is the most persistent deception of all. The child hopes without knowing why, the adult hopes despite knowing. The old man hopes still, though each day tightens the thread around his breath. Hope is not noble, it is desperate. It is the mind's last defense against the truth, that there is nothing to hope for. Not because life is cruel, but because life is blind. Blind things do not aim, they move, they collide, they consume, and so does life. We name our struggles as if naming could redeem them. We call it growth, character, purpose. But these are only words we cast like lanterns into a dark pit, trying to make sense of the senseless. The wound remains, and the one who stops pretending sees not tragedy, but machinery. The machinery of pain, repeating itself with dead precision from one body to the next. He sees that the drunkard and the emperor are crushed alike, that no crown, no prayer, no vow prevents the hour of collapse. Society offers consolations to distract from this: titles, entertainments, rituals, the theater of meaning. But under its lights, each man is alone. He plays the role, smiles on cue, suffers in private. Even the most lauded among us trembles when the curtain falls and the stagehands begin to sweep. Power does not insulate, it amplifies the void. One may climb the tower of the world, only to find that the summit is wind and silence. And the higher one climbs, the further the fall into oneself. This is the truth that civilization forbids, that the self is not a temple, but a trap. We are told to cultivate the self, to express it, to honor it. But the self is merely the will, narrowed into form, the craving thing, disguised as identity. It loves its chains, it decorates its cage with dreams. And when the cage begins to rust, it weeps not because it is imprisoned, but because it is losing its illusion of control. The wise do not renovate the cage, they step out of it. What then is freedom? Not the liberty to choose among illusions, but the relinquishment of illusion itself. Not to reshape the world, but to cease needing to look upon life with the gaze of the desert, empty, patient, without desire, to feel hunger and not obey it, to hear praise and not be stirred, to lose and not recoil. This is not apathy. It is lucidity. It is the will finally seeing itself and withdrawing. The sufferer who seeks reasons will go mad. There are none. The child who dies, the innocent who starves, the faithful who is broken, these are not errors in the design, they are the design. Nature does not reward virtue. It does not punish evil. It acts, and its actions, interpreted through the lens of human longing, appear cruel because they are not made for us. We are not the audience of existence. We are part of its noise. And yet, knowing this, the one who awakens does not curse the world. He does not shake his fist at the stars. He folds his hands. He lowers his gaze, not in shame, but in quiet acceptance. He walks as one who knows the dream is ending. He smiles, not because he is happy, but because he is no longer deceived. Even his sorrow is dignified, for it is no longer bargaining, but witness. There is a sacredness in stillness, not the stillness of sleep, but of the mountain, of the stone that has seen centuries pass in silence. To become like this, to no longer react, to no longer flinch, is the soul's retreat from the madness of becoming. Not because it is afraid, but because it has seen too much. It has tasted every fruit, chased every shadow, touched every flame, and found them all to be hollow. In such stillness, suffering is not erased, but transformed. It becomes transparent. The pain remains, but the resistance to it fades. And in the absence of resistance, there is clarity. The pain is no longer a punishment. It is simply a condition of being, like gravity, like breath. One does not argue with it. One moves within it, gently, without demand. And in this, there is strange relief. The one who sees this becomes a stranger to the world. He walks among the frantic as a ghost. He hears their hopes and nods, but his heart does not echo. He watches their joys with kindness, but no envy. He listens to their plans and sees the machinery turning behind their eyes. He does not interrupt. He has no message to deliver, no wisdom to offer, only the silence of one who has returned from the fire and left his name in the ashes. He does not preach detachment, he embodies it, not as superiority, but as absence. The absence of hunger, of grasping, of needing things to be other than they are. His presence unsettles, because it reflects what others refuse to see the futility behind their striving. But he does not judge. He remembers when he too believed, when he too reached and clung and wept. He remembers, and this remembrance becomes compassion. But not the compassion of saviors, not the soft pity of those who believe they can rescue. It is a darker compassion, steeped in resignation, a compassion that holds the hand of the suffering not to save them, but simply to say, I see you, I know this pain. We endure it together, without answers. There is no sermon here, only the warmth of shared silence in a cold and indifferent world. And yet, even in this coldness, there is a kind of beauty, a terrible, majestic beauty. The kind one sees in the vastness of space, in the gaze of an animal just before death, in the final breath of one who no longer fights. This beauty is not redemptive. It does not erase suffering. It dignifies it. It says, this, too, is part of the whole. The tears, the hunger, the loneliness, all threads in the tapestry of what is. To accept this is not to surrender to despair. Despair is the last scream of the will. Acceptance is what follows the quiet after the scream. The awareness that there is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, no self to become. Just this, the unfolding of time, the trembling of flesh, the murmuring of thoughts. And in this fragile flame of awareness, the world ceases to torment. It simply breathes. Suffering is not a flaw in the fabric of existence. It is the fabric. The world is stitched together by lack, and desire is its thread. All things that move are moved by absence. The flower bends toward the light, not because it understands light, but because it is incomplete without it. So too does man bend toward pleasure, not as fulfillment, but as temporary amnesia. In this lies the tragedy, that we reach not for wholeness, but for forgetfulness. Desire is the scream of being against its own incompleteness. It erupts before thought, beneath language, in the womb of awareness itself. To be conscious is to want, not because the object has value, but because the subject is void. This void is not a condition to be healed. It is the root of the self. One does not suffer because one lacks something. One suffers because one is the lack. And this lack, this hunger at the heart of all things, is what Schopenhauer called the will. The will is not personal. It is not your will. It is will as such, blind, undirected, unconscious. It births the cosmos without intention. It pulls stars into being and rips them apart. It is the engine of becoming and the curse of all who are caught within it. And man, as the most self-aware of its expressions, suffers most deeply. For man not only desires, he knows that he desires. And in this knowing, he also knows that he will never be free. Even when desire is briefly sated, the emptiness remains. It crouches behind every success, every embrace, every pleasure. It waits, and when the pleasure fades, as it always must, the emptiness steps forward again, more familiar than before. We do not chase fulfillment, we flee the silence within. But the silence is patient. It does not chase. It waits for exhaustion to do its work. This exhaustion, if it deepens, becomes a gift. For only in weariness does the soul begin to see clearly, not the weariness of the body, but of the will, the deep metaphysical fatigue that arises when one has tasted every fruit and found them all sour. This is the beginning of renunciation. Not moral renunciation, not the gesture of saints or martyrs, but metaphysical renunciation, the quiet turning away, not in protest, but in understanding. To renounce is not to suppress desire, but to cease believing in its promise. One still feels the stirring, the ache, the pull, but no longer confuses it with hope. One watches desire arise, like smoke from a fire long since extinguished. One does not fan it, one does not flee it, one simply observes. In this observation, something shifts. The will, deprived of complicity, begins to falter. This faltering is the first moment of peace. Not the peace of fulfillment, but the peace of no longer needing to be fulfilled. The peace of stillness within movement, of silence within speech. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with visions or revelations. It arrives like dusk, slowly, without permission, until suddenly the world is dim and quiet and still. And in this stillness, the soul no longer seeks. But the world does not cease because we cease seeking. It continues to clamor, to promise, to seduce, and the awakened one must live within it, as a stranger lives among the familiar, seeing, hearing, but no longer believing. He speaks as others speak, but his words are hollow of hunger. He acts, but his actions are not aims. They are gestures of presence, not attempts at possession. Such a one is often misunderstood. He appears aloof, even cold. But this coldness is not cruelty. It is protection from the fire of the will, from the agony of illusion. He has tasted the bitter truth, that all striving ends in dust. And having tasted it, he no longer drinks from the cup. He hands it back with a soft smile, as if to say, I remember what this was like. I do not need it anymore. Emptiness, to the unawakened, is a terror. It is what they run from with every breath, every ambition, every distraction. But to the one who has seen clearly, emptiness is home. Not because it is pleasurable, there is no pleasure in emptiness, but because it is honest. It asks nothing, it gives nothing, it simply is. And in its silent presence, the soul finds its own reflection, featureless, motionless, free. This freedom is not a liberation from the world, but from the illusion of needing the world to be different. The world continues to hurt, to fail, to decay, but the soul no longer demands that it do otherwise. It no longer cries out against the nature of things. It rests not in complacency, but in clarity. The fire still burns, but it burns around a hollow center, and in that hollow there is peace. And now, as the voice falls into its final breath, we turn to the only certainty that has never betrayed us, the silence beneath all things. The body, long fatigued from carrying the will, begins to feel transparent, like a garment worn too long, fraying at the edges of being. Each breath is a reminder that this form, too, shall pass. The hands that once reached for love, for warmth, for permanence, now fall open, not in defeat, but in release. The self, that flickering illusion, spun from memory and longing, unravels in the quiet. What remains is not a person, not a story, only presence, bare and unmoved. In this presence, time loses its teeth. There is no rush, no urgency, no future to serve as bait. The days no longer demand meaning. They simply unfold, like leaves drifting to the forest floor. Beautiful, not because they last, but because they fall. What is fragile is not lesser, it is more honest. It does not pretend to endure. It does not shout. It disappears gently, as all truth does. Look upon the grave, not with fear, but with understanding. It is not the enemy. It is the completion of a sentence long spoken. Life is a question. The grave answers not with words, but with stillness. In that stillness, there is no more seeking, no more hiding, no more masks to maintain. All things that once seemed urgent dissolve like fog in morning light. And the soul, if it can be said to remain, no longer asks, why? It has understood there was never an answer, only the asking. This is the final wisdom. To no longer wish for anything to be other than it is. To sit with suffering, not as victim, not as judge, but as witness. To feel pain without story. To see beauty without possession. To hear the cry of the world and not rush to silence it, but to let it echo and echo until it fades. We were never meant to conquer suffering. We were meant to see through it, and in seeing through it, become quiet. So much of human agony is born from resistance. The refusal to let the world be what it is. The refusal to let the self perish, to let desire fall silent. But what if the greatest act is not defiance, but surrender? Not the surrender of weakness, but of clarity. The kind that does not beg for better, but ceases to bargain. The kind that no longer clings to the riverbank, but allows itself to drift not toward a destination, but into the formless. And in that drift, in that letting go, the last illusion dies, that we were ever separate from what suffers. The pain we feared, the void we fled, the death we denied, they were never outside us. They were us. And to embrace them is to embrace the truth, that the will to live is the will to suffer, and to let go of that will is the only true escape, not into nothingness, but into silence. What remains, then, is not despair. Despair is the final scream of the dying will. What remains is calm, a vast and tender calm, like the ocean at night. There are no more voices in this place, no more striving, no more names, only the slow breathing of existence, vast, indifferent, and pure. And in this final breath, something opens, not a gate, not a heaven, but a space where need has vanished. The soul, stripped of all it tried to be, lies down, not to sleep, not to dream, but to rest in what is. And there, where the last desire has faded, where the will has been seen and left behind, there is no joy, no sorrow, no self. There is only the silence that was always waiting.